The Rugaru. In a small, isolated community deep in the Canadian wilderness, there was a legend of a creature known as the Rugaru. According to the legend, the Rugaru was a monstrous being that roamed the forest and preyed on those who broke the traditional rules of the community. No one had ever seen the Rugaru, but everyone knew the stories. Children were warned not to wander too far into the woods, and adults were cautioned to never speak ill of their neighbors or to break any of the other community rules. Despite the warnings, there were always those who were willing to push the boundaries. One night, a group of young men gathered in secret to drink and tell stories. As the night wore on, their laughter grew louder and their language grew coarser. They joked about the community rules and made light of the old legends. Suddenly, they heard a rustling in the bushes. At first, they thought it was just a deer, but then they saw a pair of glowing red eyes staring back at them from the darkness. They froze in fear as the creature emerged from the shadows. It was like nothing they had ever seen before. Half man, half wolf, with razor-sharp claws and teeth that gleamed in the moonlight. It let out a chilling howl that echoed through the trees and then lunged at the group of young men. They scattered in all directions, but the Rugaru was too fast. It hunted them down one by one, tearing them apart with its powerful jaws and claws. By morning, there was nothing left of the young men but scraps of torn clothing and pools of blood. From that day forward, the community was never the same. No one dared to break the traditional rules for fear that the Rugaru would come for them. Even the elders spoke in hushed tones about the dangers of disrespecting the old ways. And every once in a while, on a still night when the moon was full, the sound of a howl could be heard in the distance. It was the Rugaru, still out there in the darkness, waiting for those who dared to test the boundaries of the community. Years went by and the legend of the Rugaru faded into memory. The community continued to thrive, and life went on as it always had. But there were those who never forgot the horror they had witnessed that fateful night. One of those people was a young girl named Mia. She had been just a child when the Rugaru attacked, but the memory of that night had stayed with her. She had always been fascinated by the old legends, and as she grew older, she became determined to uncover the truth behind the Rugaru. Mia spent years researching the legend, poring over old texts, and speaking to elders in the community. Eventually, she discovered something that sent shivers down her spine. According to one old story, the Rugaru was not just a monster, but a curse. Legend had it that the first Rugaru was a man who had broken one of the community's most sacred rules. He had killed another member of the community in a fit of rage, and as punishment, he was cursed to transform into a monster every night for the rest of his life. The curse was said to have been passed down through the generations, infecting anyone who broke the rules. Mia was horrified by what she had learned. She knew that the community needed to be warned about the danger they were in, but she also knew that no one would believe her. The legend of the Rugaru had become just that, a legend, a story to scare children. But Mia knew that the Rugaru was real, and she knew that it was still out there, waiting for its next victim. She decided to take matters into her own hands. Armed with the knowledge she had gained and a sense of determination, she set out into the woods, determined to find the Rugaru and put an end to its reign of terror. As she journeyed deeper into the forest, Mia could feel the weight of the curse bearing down on her. She knew that if she broke any of the community's rules, she could become the next Rugaru. But she pushed on, driven by a sense of duty and a desire to protect her community. The Rugaru was there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. Mia stood her ground, summoning all of her courage and knowledge. She knew that she had to break the curse, and the only way to do that was to confront the Rugaru head-on. In a tense showdown, Mia battled the Rugaru. It was a fierce fight, and at times it seemed as though the monster would overpower her. But Mia was determined to break the curse, and in the end, she emerged victorious. The curse was broken, and the Rugaru was vanquished. Mia returned to the community, hailed as a hero. She knew that the legend of the Rugaru would live on, but she also knew that her community was safe, protected from the curse that had haunted them for generations. And as she looked out at the forest, she knew that she had done what needed to be done, even if it had come at great personal risk. In the days and weeks that followed, the community began to heal. They had always known about the legend of the Rugaru, but they had never really believed it. Mia's bravery had shown them that there was truth behind the old stories, and they began to respect the rules and traditions that had kept them safe for so many years. Mia became a local legend, revered for her bravery and her determination to protect her community. People came from far and wide to hear her story, and she became something of a celebrity in her own right. But Mia never forgot the horrors she had witnessed. She knew that the Rugaru was just one manifestation of the darkness that lurked in the hearts of men. She had seen the damage that could be wrought when people broke the rules, when they let their anger and fear get the best of them. And so Mia dedicated her life to teaching others about the dangers of breaking the rules. She became an advocate for community values and worked tirelessly to keep the memory of the Rugaru alive. She knew that the legend would never truly die, but she hoped that her efforts would help to prevent anyone else from suffering the same fate as those young men so many years ago. And as for the Rugaru itself, some say that it still lurks in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. But Mia knew that she had broken the curse, and she hoped that the monster was gone for good. Either way, she knew that she had done what she could, and that was enough. The hairy men. As the sun began to set and the shadows lengthened, a group of teenagers made their way into the woods near their small town. They were looking for a place to hang out, away from the prying eyes of adults, and had heard that there was a clearing deep in the forest that was perfect for their purposes. But as they ventured further into the woods, they began to feel uneasy. The trees seemed to loom over them, blocking out the last rays of sunlight and casting everything in a deep, impenetrable darkness. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves underfoot and the occasional hoot of an owl in the distance. Suddenly, one of the girls in the group let out a scream. She had seen something moving in the shadows, something large and hairy with glowing red eyes. The others laughed nervously, telling her she was just imagining things, but their bravado was short-lived. As they continued on their way, they heard the sound of heavy footsteps coming closer and closer. The hairs on the back of their necks stood on end as they realized that they were being followed by something sinister and terrifying. And then they saw it, a figure emerging from the trees, a towering mass of fur and muscle with eyes that burned like coals in the darkness. It was the hairy man, the legendary creature of the Lumbee tribe, and it was coming straight for them. The teenagers ran as fast as they could, but the hairy man was faster. It pursued them through the woods, its ragged breaths echoing in their ears as they stumbled over rocks and roots in their desperation to escape. Finally, they burst out of the forest and into the safety of the town, gasping for breath and hearts pounding in their chests. But they knew that they had come face to face with something beyond their understanding, something that lurked in the darkness and waited to prey upon the unsuspecting. Before we go on with the stories, I remind you to like the video and subscribe to support the channel. The Basket Woman. From that day on, they never ventured into the woods at night again for fear of what might be lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce on its next victim. And the legend of the hairy man lived on, a warning to all who dared to venture into the dark heart of the forest. The forests of eastern Canada were said to be home to an old woman who lived deep in the woods. She was known as the Basket Woman, and her reputation was a sinister one. Parents warned their children to never venture too far into the woods, or the Basket Woman might take them away in her basket. The legend said that the Basket Woman was once a loving grandmother who lived in a small cabin in the woods. She would often go out to gather berries and mushrooms and would bring her grandchildren along with her. One day, however, she went too far into the woods and stumbled upon an ancient burial ground. As she explored the area, she heard a voice calling out to her from one of the tombs. It was the voice of an old woman begging for help to be released from her tomb. The Basket Woman, being kind-hearted, opened the tomb and helped the old woman out. But as soon as the old woman was free, she revealed herself to be a witch who had been trapped in the tomb for centuries. The witch cursed the Basket Woman, turning her into a monstrous creature with a giant basket on her back. From that day on, the Basket Woman roamed the woods, kidnapping children and carrying them away in her basket. One dark and stormy night, a group of children were playing in the woods near the Basket Woman's cabin. They didn't realize how far they had strayed from their homes until it was too late. Suddenly, they heard a creaking sound coming from the trees. They looked up and saw the Basket Woman emerging from the shadows, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. The children tried to run, but the Basket Woman was too fast. She scooped them up in her basket and carried them deep into the woods. The children screamed and cried for help, but no one could hear them over the sound of the thunder and rain. The next morning, the parents of the missing children searched the woods, but they found no trace of their children. Some say that they heard the faint sound of children crying in the distance, but they couldn't locate the source of the sound. And so the legend of the Basket Woman continued to haunt the people of eastern Canada for generations to come. Years passed, and the legend of the basket woman faded from memory. But then, one day, a group of young campers decided to venture into the woods for a weekend of fun and adventure. They had heard the stories of the basket woman, but they dismissed them as mere superstition. As the campers set up their tents and started a campfire, they felt a sense of unease. It was as if they were being watched by something unseen, but they shrugged it off and continued with their activities. That night, as they sat around the campfire telling ghost stories, they heard a rustling in the bushes. They looked up and saw the silhouette of an old woman with a basket on her back. It was the basket woman. The campers tried to run, but the basket woman was too quick. She scooped them up in her basket and carried them deep into the woods. They screamed and cried for help, but no one could hear them. As the night wore on, the campers realized that they were not alone in the woods. They saw other children who had been taken by the basket woman, and they were now part of her twisted family. They had all been turned into monsters, and they were hungry for fresh flesh. The campers knew that they had to escape before they met the same fate. They gathered their courage and made a run for it. They ran through the woods, their hearts pounding in their chests, until they finally reached the safety of their homes. But they knew that they could never forget the terror of that night. They knew that the basket woman was still out there, waiting for her next victim, and they knew that they could never venture into the woods again for fear of what lurked in the shadows. And so the legend of the basket woman continued to haunt the people of eastern Canada, reminding them of the dangers that lurk in the darkness of the woods. The Owl Witch. Once upon a time, there was a small village nestled in the heart of the Zuni Reservation. The people of the village lived in harmony with the natural world around them, always showing respect to the spirits that governed the land. One day, a group of outsiders came to the village. They were loud and disrespectful, chopping down trees and littering on the ground. The villagers tried to reason with them, but they were ignored. That night, as the villagers slept, a blood-curdling screech echoed through the darkness. It was the sound of the Owl Witch, who had been awakened by the outsiders' disrespect for the natural world. One by one, the outsiders disappeared from their tents, snatched away by the witch in her owl form. The villagers tried to warn them, but it was too late. They had crossed a line that they could not come back from. The villagers were terrified, knowing that the Owl Witch could strike again at any moment. They tried to offer sacrifices to appease her, but it was no use. The witch was beyond reason or mercy. As the days passed, the villagers grew more and more desperate. They knew that they had to find a way to stop the Owl Witch before she took any more lives. One brave young man volunteered to hunt the witch, armed with only his bow and arrow. He tracked the witch deep into the forest, where he found her perched on a tree branch, watching him with her piercing eyes. He took aim and fired, but the arrow bounced harmlessly off her feathers. The witch let out a sinister cackle, knowing that she was invincible. The young man was about to give up when he remembered the wisdom of his elders. He spoke to the witch in her own language, asking her why she was doing this. The witch listened, and she was moved by his sincerity. She revealed that she was a spirit of the land, tasked with protecting the natural world from those who would harm it. The young man realized that he had been wrong to hunt the witch, and he begged for her forgiveness. The witch forgave him, and she disappeared into the night, never to be seen again. The villagers learned a valuable lesson from the encounter with the Owl Witch. They knew that they had to respect the natural world around them, or else face the wrath of the spirits that governed it. And the young man who had faced the witch became a hero in the eyes of the village, his bravery and wisdom celebrated for generations to come. From that day forward, the villagers made a renewed commitment to live in harmony with the land. They stopped cutting down trees for no reason and started taking better care of the animals that lived in the forest. But the memory of the Owl Witch lingered in their minds, and they knew that they could never forget the lessons that they had learned. They knew that there were other spirits out there, watching over the land and the people who lived on it, and they knew that they had to treat them with the respect and reverence that they deserved. As for the young man who had faced the witch, he became a revered figure in the village, known for his courage and wisdom. He went on to become a leader of the people, helping them to live in balance with the natural world and inspiring future generations to do the same. And though the villagers never forgot the terror that the Owl Witch had brought, they also never forgot the message that she had brought with her. They knew that the land was sacred and that they were all connected to it in ways that they could not fully understand. And so they lived their lives, always mindful of the spirits that watched over them, always respectful of the natural world around them. And though they faced many challenges and obstacles along the way, they never forgot the lesson that the Owl Witch had taught them, and they continued to live in harmony with the land. The Ghost Bride. Once upon a time, in a Haida village nestled deep in the Pacific Northwest, a beautiful young woman named Kaya was getting ready to marry the love of her life, a handsome young man named Taro. They had been together for many years and their love was the talk of the village. Everyone knew that they were meant to be together. On the day of their wedding, everything was perfect. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and the village was alive with the sounds of celebration. But as the ceremony began, something strange started to happen. Kaya began to feel a chill in the air, as if a dark presence had entered the village. Suddenly, without warning, Kaya collapsed to the ground. Her body writhed in pain as she let out a blood-curdling scream. The villagers rushed to her side, but it was too late. Kaya had died. As the villagers mourned the loss of their beloved Kaya, Taro was nowhere to be found. It was later discovered that he had been unfaithful to Kaya and had fled the village in shame. But Kaya's spirit would not rest. She returned as a vengeful ghost, seeking revenge on Taro and anyone else who crossed her path. The villagers could hear her wailing in the night, and some claimed to have seen her ghostly figure wandering the village in search of her unfaithful groom. Taro, terrified by Kaya's ghostly presence, fled into the woods and was never seen again. But Kaya's spirit remained, haunting the village for generations to come. To this day, some say that her ghost can still be heard wailing in the night, seeking revenge on those who have wronged her. Over the years, Kaya's legend grew in the Haida village, and parents would often tell their children the story as a warning to stay faithful to their partners. But even with the passing of time, the villagers could still feel Kaya's ghostly presence, and some claimed that they could see her on foggy nights, wandering through the forest. One day, a group of young men from the village decided to prove their bravery by venturing into the woods in search of Kaya's ghost. As they walked deeper into the forest, the air grew colder and the trees began to loom ominously overhead. Suddenly, they heard a faint wailing in the distance. The sound grew louder and more intense as they approached a clearing. There, in the center of the clearing, stood the ghostly figure of Kaya. The young men were frozen in fear as Kaya's ghostly form floated towards them. But just as they thought they were doomed, Kaya's figure dissolved into the mist. The young men returned to the village, shaken but unharmed. From that day on, the villagers respected Kaya's memory and the warning that her story conveyed. They knew that her ghostly presence would never leave the village, and they learned to live with the fear that Kaya's ghost could appear at any moment. And to this day, some say that they can hear the wailing of Kaya's ghostly form, reminding them to stay true to their love and to always respect the power of the spirits. The Manitou. Deep in the heart of the Great Lakes region, there was a small community of Ojibwe people who lived in harmony with the natural world. They believed in the power of the Manitou, a spirit that could take on many forms and was said to possess people. One day, a young man in the community began to act strangely. He spoke in tongues and his eyes glowed with an eerie light. His family and friends became worried as he started to withdraw from them, spending long hours alone in the forest. As the days went by, the young man's behavior became more and more erratic. He began to have terrible nightmares and would wake up screaming in the middle of the night. His family and friends tried to help him, but he became increasingly hostile and violent towards them. It soon became clear that the young man was possessed by the Manitou, and there was little that could be done to help him. The people of the community became afraid, as they knew that the Manitou could possess anyone, at any time. Over the next few weeks, more and more people in the community began to show signs of possession. They too spoke in tongues, had nightmares, and became violent towards their loved ones. The community was in chaos, and no one knew how to stop the Manitou from spreading its influence. In the end, the only solution was to flee. The people of the community gathered their belongings and left their homes, hoping to escape the grasp of the Manitou. But even as they left, they could feel its presence following them, watching them, waiting for its next victim. Years went by, and the people of the community never forgot the terror they had experienced at the hands of the Manitou. They tried to warn others of the danger, but few believed them, chalking up their stories to superstition and folklore. It continued to lurk in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to strike again. And when a group of outsiders arrived in the area, the Manitou saw its chance. The outsiders were a group of researchers who had come to study the natural world in the Great Lakes region. They were fascinated by the legends of the Manitou, but they dismissed them as mere stories, believing that there was a scientific explanation for everything. As they began their work, strange things started to happen. Tools and equipment would go missing, and strange noises could be heard in the forest at night. The researchers began to feel like they were being watched, and they started to fear for their safety. One night, as they were gathered around a campfire, they saw a figure emerging from the darkness. It was the young man who had first been possessed by the Manitou, but he was no longer human. His eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and his body was contorted into unnatural shapes. The researchers tried to flee, but they were no match for the Manitou. One by one, they were possessed and driven to madness, until they too became part of the Manitou's army of the damned. And so the Manitou continues to haunt the Great Lakes region, waiting for its next victims. Those who venture into the woods at night know to beware, for the Manitou is always watching, always waiting, always hungry for more souls to possess. Thanks for tuning into our scary story today. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to our channel for more spooky tales like this one. Until next time, stay safe and keep your lights on at night.